We move now, somewhat later than scheduled, to item number 213, private members' business motion regarding JobPath. I call on Deputy John Brady to move the motion. Deputy Brady, you have 20 minutes.
I'm taking 7.5, Count Corla.
You've been joined by your colleagues.
Yep. First of all, Count Corla, I'm delighted to bring this motion before the House to discuss and debate the much discredited JobPath programme which was rolled out in 2015. Minister, Torres Nua requested that he changed his name on his CV so that he would not identify as a traveller. This was done against his wishes. Torres Nua applied for a job for her in a remote call centre, a 1.5-hour drive each way, no bus service. Despite her objection that she had no means of travelling to work there, she was advised to make friends and carpool. At this time, she was 5 months pregnant. When she complained, she was threatened with sanctions. Around this time, she became homeless, staying on her parents' couch. Minister, a qualified architect, Torres Nua forced her to hound potential employers. When this failed, Torres Nua instructed her to dumb down her CV to find other types of work. Minister, these are just some of the experiences shared by JobPath participants to researchers from Waterford Institute of Technology. They concluded that JobPath participants felt actively patronised, cajoled, threatened, manipulated and bullied. A far cry from your claim that JobPath is the most successful job activation scheme in the history of the state. In reality, JobPath providers are not helping and supporting unemployed people, as your counter-motion states. Our evidence suggests they themselves haven't got the necessary skills or indeed training. They are simply making money on the back of unemployed people. It is not about the needs of the individual. It's a work-first approach. In the words of your predecessor, Leo Varadkar, people must give up their ambition of a dream job and, in essence, take any job. When it comes to the privatisation agenda pursued by your department, when it comes to JobPath and the use of contracting out the service, you consistently compare it to the local employment service. Yes, the LES is contracted out, but the LES is not based on a payment by results model. That is what is at issue here, and yet you completely overlook this. In fact, Minister, to compare JobPath to the LES is highly insulting to the highly trained and qualified people that work within the LES. Not only does your department hand over an initial fee of €311, you refer to it as a small registration fee for every individual that signs up to JobPath. You hand it over twice in the case of over 21,000 people who your department have referred over to JobPath twice. So really not a small amount, and particularly when it's paid on the double. Torres Nua and CTEC must be laughing, Minister, all the way to the bank with their €160 million in their back pocket. €3,718 taxpayers' money is handed over to Torres Nua and CTEC for every job source that lasts at least 52 weeks. That is €3,718 for every person per job, a ludicrous amount of money. JobPath providers are not engaging with individuals to help and to support them. They are doing so simply to make money. They are private companies, and their sole aim, Minister, is to make money and a profit. In your counter-motion, and indeed your press release that you issued today, you cite 41,000 people have found full-time jobs. How long have they lasted in those jobs, Minister, and how long have those jobs actually lasted for them? More than 13 weeks? Can you give us a breakdown on the number of these jobs which have been sustained for more than 1 year? In November last year, the Secretary-General of your department told the Public Accounts Committee that out of the 190,000 people referred at that stage, only 17,100 people had sourced employment that lasted for at least 1 year, a mere 9% of participants. In reality, to the very low level of complaints you consistently mention when praising the success of JobPath, you fail to acknowledge that those referred to JobPath are threatened with cuts to their job seekers' payments from the very first communication they receive from JobPath. Why would someone under constant threat of sanction, under the threat of losing the only source of income that they have, make a formal complaint to your department, Minister? To date, over 14,000 JobPath participants have had a penalty rate applied. In many cases, in many counties, it exceeds 10, 11, 12%. As regards other job activation schemes, community-based, reputable, long-standing schemes, your counter-motion states that the funding and staffing for LES have been maintained. But again, Minister, you miss the actual issue. The number of referrals has not been maintained. They are down right across the entire state. As a result of JobPath, the LES will tell you this themselves, Minister. Supporting the motion here tonight will not mean that the long-term unemployed will suddenly miss out on the opportunity to source employment. Schemes such as the LES, the Adult Guidance Service, Jobs Clubs and Community Employment are the very ones that brought us to full employment in the Celtic Tiger era, well before JobPath ever came into existence. They were indeed the success stories, but you have bypassed them to line the pockets of Torresnue and CTEC to the tune of over €160 million. This motion, Minister, is not about calling for JobPath to be cancelled. It is calling for an end to the referrals to JobPath and an end to the mandatory nature of the scheme. So why you felt the need to release a press statement based on the cancellation or suspension of JobPath, which is mentioned nowhere in the motion, is completely beyond me, and it begs the question as to whether you actually read it. I look forward to the debate tonight, Minister, from all sides of the House here, and I hope that we will get full support for this motion that Sinn Féin has brought forward to actually deal with and do away with the much discredited JobPath programme.
Minister, JobPath was described today as short-term, coercive and ruthless by a number of academics from Waterford Institute of Technology. And indeed, there was a submission that was given to Deputy Brady by over 29 different community-based groups who run the CE scheme, who had a very similar view of the scheme. And people who use the system and people who use other systems have a view of JobPath that is completely the polar opposite of the government's view. The government likes to pretend that JobPath was a success when in fact it was a failure. And you like to pretend, Minister, that people had a good experience. Some may have had a good experience, but a lot of people have not had a very good experience. In fact, many people who have come to me who have been through the JobPath programme have used words like coercive, that they've been threatened, and that they have had a very, very bad experience with the process. Minister, it's quite clear to me, and I don't make any bones in saying this, the Your Party has no interest in workers' rights. So it's no surprise to me that you, on a continuous basis, pretend that this is a fantastic scheme while you ignore the labour activation schemes that actually work. And the reason why you like to put this up as a scheme that works and is such a fantastic scheme is because it is the privatisation of labour activation schemes. Two private companies who get 150 million of taxpayers' money to roll out schemes that a lot of people are uncomfortable with and a lot of people have had bad experiences with. Here is the facts that had to be dragged out of the department at the Public Accounts Committee. And Deputy Brady and others have been calling for these figures year in, year out in terms of the actual cost, what these companies get and how much the individual costs are. And we got them at the Public Accounts Committee after an awful lot of cajoling and an awful lot of work from the Secretary-General in your department. €3,718 per job seeker. We can smile if you like, Minister. I was at the Public Accounts Committee. I asked the questions. We were stonewalled and we eventually got the answers. Two private companies receive €150 million. And this is despite the fact that only 7% of JobPath clients were still in employment after 12 months. 7%. And yet you say that that's a fantastic success. And this is at a time when unemployment was falling. It was falling anyway. And yet we give £150 million to 2 private companies to roll out a programme that people have serious concerns with. So I commend the motion to you, Minister. Take your head from out of the clouds and recognise that there are major problems with this scheme. Listen to the people that we listen to on a daily basis and take on board what's in this motion. And for once, Fine Gael should accept that this is wrong and that this is not good for workers' rights.
Minister, I don't have long to speak, but I would urge you to withdraw the counter-motion and to consider the points being put forward. You cannot call it a success when less than 9% of people have sourced jobs that last longer than 12 months. They're not good jobs, they're not permanent jobs, they're not decent jobs, they're not jobs that people are looking at. There are schemes that work, and Minister, I don't know if you do advice clinics in your local area or if you speak to people who come into your office, or maybe they don't come near you, maybe they realise there's no point. But in my office, I see people every day, and the words that have been used by my colleague, short-term, coercive and ruthless, these are the words used to describe the scheme that you come in here and say that you are proud of. I don't know how you could be proud of those short-term, coercive and ruthless. They leave the people who participate in it, not through their choice, but they leave people feeling degraded. It is not a positive experience for people. And Minister, if it is a case that they will not say it to you, and maybe they don't believe they'll get a good hearing, they certainly say it to me. They certainly say it to my colleagues, and I know they have no hesitation to saying it to those people who run advice clinics up and down the country, because these schemes are not working. And not only are they not working, not only are they costing the state a fortune, you are trying to privatise labour activation when there are schemes that do work, that leave people with a positive experience, that leave people feeling empowered and ready to re-enter the labour market. But this is not one of those schemes. And to come in and to defend it is to go against what people are telling us is the reality that they experience as part of your labour activation model, your privatised labour activation model. Minister, short-term, coercive and ruthless are the terms used by academics to describe the programme. You really should reflect on that before you take to your feet to defend it. Good night.
A gal Chacta John Brady Hodge Iraqti Har Nablenta Chafana Niscam JobPath and Octa. JobPath was introduced in 2015 by the then Minister for Social Protection, Joan Burton. And Sinn Féin believed then, and we've been proved right since, that this scheme is more about massaging the unemployment statistics than with delivering for those seeking employment. It's also about privatising public services. Sinn Féin has consistently highlighted serious concerns about its processes. We have repeatedly expressed our concern about the delivery of JobPath by 2 private companies, Tourist Nua and CTAC. Figures released late last year revealed that of almost 200,000 people referred to JobPath, only 9% had secured employment for at least 1 year. And that's an appalling record of failure and at a huge cost to the taxpayer. The 2 private companies, well, Tourist Nua received €76 million and CTAX received €73 million of the people's money. For the thousands who have been forced through this scheme, the experience has been deeply unsatisfactory. And I've heard in my own constituency of Louth and East Meath first-hand accounts from citizens. In one instance, a young mother with young children was required to organise and pay for childcare to attend JobPath offices just to do an internet job search. Another woman had her job seekers payment cut by €25 for not signing a personal progression plan despite having attended all the sessions in the course. So €76 million for Tourist Nua and €25 taken from a young woman. And these aren't unique to Louth. As we've heard earlier, Ray Griffin, Tom Boland, both doctors from the Waterford Employment Research Collaborative, concluded that the impact of JobPath on individual lives is decidedly negative. Not one of 121 people interviewed by the Waterford researchers reported a positive experience. Indeed, they described it as patronising, threatening, bullying and manipulative. So JobPath should be abolished. Funding should now be provided to the likes of community employment, the local employment service, adult guidance services, which have a much better record of assisting citizens in search of employment. I commend this motion to the Dáil.
Because they've covered a lot of it, but I'm just going to cover a bit of the humanistic side of it. This is not me, it's one of my constituents, and he asked me to read it out tonight. Very simple. It says, "Hey Pat, I started in Tourist Nua at the start of December. Unsure of the date, but this is my second time doing this scam, just like many others. I attended the first appointment, which took roughly 2 hours. My next appointment was the first week of January, which I attended, to be told when I got there that my advisor was sick. So I asked the secretary to inform the advisor that I cannot be there any time after 12. She asked why, so I explained how my 80-year-old mother gets sick in the afternoons, which she genuinely does, and I am the only one around to be with her. I didn't get another appointment for the following week at 1:30, so I rang 3 days beforehand to inform him that I will not be attending as it's after 12:30. I told him the latest I can push it would be 1 p.m. His response was, "You come when we tell you to come." And my response was, and I won't repeat it in here, he then asked, had I filled out a carer's allowance form and had I sent it in? I said yes, otherwise I would have lost it. I haven't. I did not claim for it when I was caring for my father upon to his death, nor will I be doing it for my mother. I also informed him that I am available 7 days a week, up to 12 to 1 p.m. on some days. So I am engaging, but clearly he is not. I didn't get an appointment for next Tuesday at 11:30, which I have no issue with. However, then yesterday he sends me 2 more appointments, one for the following Tuesday and the next for 1:30 and the next one at 4:30, for so-called courses which are just a waste of my time. I have attached the appointment letters below. The question is, have I any rights here whatsoever? Because I am not jumping through hoops for no private for-profit company, nor will I be bullied or threatened by them. So what rights have I? So, Minister, I just wanted to humanise it because I get these maybe once or twice a week in Save. So, I mean, I would have appealed to you to withdraw your counter motion and please support the Sinn Féin motion in here tonight.
The Minister, the JobPath scheme has proved to be very lucrative for a number of private companies. This is a scheme that comes at a huge cost to the taxpayer. Up to the end of last year, fee payments made to 2 contractors, CTech Employment and Tourist Nua, who delivered the scheme, have amounted to €149 million since 2015. A shocking amount of money that I believe could have been better used to assist people back to employment. CTech Employment and Tourist Nua get money every time a person signs a personal progression plan. In addition, the 2 companies get paid job sustainment fees. I have real concerns about both the operators of the scheme, the results, or in reality, the lack of results of the scheme, and additionally, the substantial costs involved to the taxpayer in running this scheme. Unemployed people do not have, nor can they expect to enjoy, equal rights and considerations as those enjoyed by working people. But JobPath seems to treat people almost as second-class citizens. I've heard of many instances where people are sent to jobs they clearly have no aptitude for, interest in, or are remotely relevant to the qualifications and skills they already have. People will have legitimate reasons why they can't participate in the scheme. If they are already on the scheme and miss a day here or there, they will face a range of sanctions such as closure or disallowance of the person's job seeker claim. People can also be sanctioned by losing a portion of their welfare payments. the portion of their benefits lost can have a real impact on the individual and their dependents. These people are already struggling to pay bills and feed their families or keep a roof over their heads. It's a failed scheme and needs to be phased out. The primary beneficiary of the scheme seems to be the private companies making the big bucks, because it doesn't seem to be the unemployed person. Mullimund on PMB Shaw.
Thanks, Count Corla. I genuinely welcome the opportunity to address the House on the important role that JobsPath service has played and continues to play in the provision of activation services to our long-term unemployed. Deputies have seen and heard the counter-motion tabled by the Government, and I wholeheartedly endorse its wording. The Government and its immediate predecessor have worked tirelessly to address the crisis levels of unemployment brought about by the most recent recession. In January 2012, Ireland's unemployment level stood at a whopping 16%. Guiding the Government's approach to this level of unemployment was the Action Plan for Jobs, the Pathways to Work strategy and, most recently, the Action Plan for Jobless Households. A key element of these strategies was ensuring that those who found themselves unemployed were given access to a supportive activation services that was tailored to meet their specific needs. My department, in the period of 2012 to 2015, transformed its approach to supporting job seekers, both in terms of establishing our NGO offices, but also in terms of the adoption and rollout of new activation model. The Intrio activation model supplemented the existing activation services operated by our local employment services and Jobs Club. However, the scale of the economic crisis meant that the system's activation capacity was insufficient to deal with the sheer volume of job seekers. The result was that the case officers in Intrio and our local employment services had caseloads in excess of 2,000 job seekers to one caseload or one case officer. This was unfair, unsustainable and unacceptable. Additional capacity had to be resourced, and the department increased the number of Intrio case officers, but on its own this wasn't sufficient. In 2015, Count Corla, the JobPath service was developed and became operational. This allowed all job seekers to have access to a case officer, a mediator or an advisor, with the aim of developing a personal progression plan tailored specifically to their needs. The ratio of case officers to job seekers is now in line with international best practice and stands at approximately 120 to 1. The increased investment worked. Ireland's unemployment rate in December 2018 stood at 5.3%, a reduction of two-thirds from its peak 6 years previously. And furthermore, long-term unemployment has fallen from almost 10% in 2012 to its current level of 2%. And that's a remarkable reduction of almost 4/5 in a relatively short period of time. However, the reduction in the long-term unemployment rate is even more impressive when you consider that long-term unemployment has averaged 4% over the extended period of 1992 to 2018. Today's rate, despite one of the worst economic recessions in our history, is currently less than half the average over a 26-year period. JobsPath, combined with this government's economic and activation strategies, have contributed substantially to this transformation. And key to this success is ensuring that all the unemployment, for the first time in Ireland, had access to a dedicated, individually tailored activation service which aims to support their transition into employment. Almost 206,000 people have engaged with the JobPath service, of which approximately 48,000 are still engaged. Since 2015, 41,000 persons gained a full-time job, while engaged, and a further 5,000 found part-time employment. And these figures should be regarded as minimums, because they will only increase as more individuals who are still engaged with JobsPath continue to find employment. Last year, Count Corla, the Controller and Auditor General presented the results of a review conducted by his office of the JobsPath service. Having conducted an examination, the Controller and Auditor General had no recommendations to make to us, but noted that JobsPath is delivering on its targets, and that's a significant finding in itself. We have heard questions raising concerning the nature of the payments by results system and the overall costs of JobsPath service. And I think it's important to reiterate that the cost to date of €160 million for 206,000 participants equates to less than €790 per individual. This compares favourably with our other activation services, where the cost is closer to €1,000. And uniquely, the JobPath contractors have had to bear all of the costs up front. The JobPath model has reduced the risk to the state. It's increased the capacity of Ireland's public employment services to effectively engage with individual job seekers, and the model ensures that JobPath providers are incentivised to assist people into sustainable, full-time employment. Now, I'm aware that there have been claims made to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Employment Affairs and Social Protection in terms of the high levels of dissatisfaction reported by job seekers engaged with the JobPath service. The opposition motion before the House references research from the Waterford Institute of Technology, which interviewed 121 people since 2012, of which only 25 had reported an experience of JobPath. The researchers relayed the anecdotes for the participants. They didn't seek to substantiate these anecdotes, nor do they claim to. And the officials in my department have been in touch with the researchers and asked for more details so that we could examine some of the very serious allegations related to the committee. The researchers have declined to provide any more information to date. My department measures the satisfaction levels of those who use our JobPath service. Over 6,000 customers have been interviewed by independent researchers in the last 3 years regarding their experience with JobPath. The average scores across all areas are 4.15 out of 5, and that reflects consistently high levels of satisfaction. Furthermore, out of the 206,000 people who have engaged with the service, there have been only 836 complaints. That's less than half of 1% of all of the 206,000 participants. Each of the JobPath contractors have comprehensive complaint systems with varying levels of escalation. If a customer is not satisfied with the response from the contractor, they can escalate it to the officials in my department, and this has only happened on 10 occasions to date. Then, if the customer is not satisfied, they can escalate it to the Ombudsman. This has never happened. Yet, if we were to listen to some of the commentators, such as Sinn Féin and others, you would imagine that the Ombudsman's office would be inundated with the complaints of the horrors allegedly inflicted by a service which is actually helping people gain full-time employment and to break away from the cycle of long-term unemployment and, in particular, the reliance on social welfare. That's what the JobPath service is all about. It's about assisting those persons who are long-term unemployed return to the workforce. It is a duty of this government and society to assist people who want to find work. And I think it's obvious fact that the most divisive factor in individuals improving their economic circumstances and being lifted out of poverty is to secure employment and to reduce their dependency on welfare. The impact of a successful return to employment on an individual is absolutely enormous and in a lot of cases can be life-changing. In addressing this motion, I can say that the Government will not be walking away from its contractual commitments. The immediate cancellation of the JobPath service would result in a significant diminution of the services we now provide to the long-term unemployed. It would result in the loss of 600 jobs amongst our JobPath staff, who I genuinely have to say, of whom I've met on my travels up and down the country, are passionate and dedicated in the roles that they provide and to the people that they serve. And also, in the absence of due cause warranting such a cancellation prior to 2021, we would be exposing the state to significant financial liabilities. Furthermore, we need to have this service in place for the people who need it. There are still, unfortunately, many thousands of people who are long-term unemployed and need the service that's delivered by JobPath and our other providers. The contracts will operate as agreed. And I think, looking to the future for activation services, my department is already examining all of our options for contracted activation provisions from 2020 onwards. We will identify best practice across a number of considerations, including the quality of one-to-one intensive engagement, the value of a statewide service, the contracting models and the procurement methodology. And in addition, with the commitments in the Government's Pathway to Work strategy, my department will be examining options to maximise provisions of activation services to all groups, some of whom maybe have been harder to reach in the past. In developing best practice, appropriate consideration will be given to the value of expertise gained through the long experience of working with communities and the wider value of activation services and their impact in terms of community development and social inclusion. To conclude, Ceann Comhairle, I have presented the facts about JobPath, and I would challenge those to claim who have other information to present them as facts, as opposed to anecdotes, to support their claims. JobsPath has provided a significant contribution to this government's success in bringing our unemployment figures down from the height of the recession to what they currently are today.
These Curran, Butler, Scanlon, Chambers and O'Keefe. How long have I got, Cian Curran?
20 minutes between us.
20 minutes after, yeah, all right.
8 minutes.
I listened in great amazement to the contribution of the Minister. I mean, if you just look at the second page of her speech, I mean, nobody believes that unemployment in this country dropped from 16% in 2015 to 5% now because of JobsPath. I mean, you know, it's beyond belief that the Minister should come in here and make such a claim, or attempt to make such a claim. I've always had instinctive reservations about the idea of the private sector being involved in job activation on behalf of the state, because obviously there's a conflict. There's a conflict between the company providing the service, whose main objective is to make profit, and the needs of the individual who they're supposed to serve. Naturally, the profit motive takes precedence. And this is a situation, labour activation, where the individual, particularly people who have been long-term unemployed, should be front and centre. Front and centre. Now, anybody who studies the operation of how JobsPath has functioned in this country for the past number of years will readily be able to conclude that the rigid model simply isn't working. The pay-by-results rigid model, one-size-fits-all, is not working. The profit motive predominates, and as a result, countless people have been pushed into, forced, under threat of sanction, into jobs that are unsuitable, low-skilled, no-skilled, and utterly inappropriate. In the vast majority of cases, very low-paid. Now, the Irish model, I'm told, is based on what we've introduced here is based on the Australian model. But the difference, of course, is that in Australia, the authorities, the government, the relevant department has taken great pains to ensure that the scheme is monitored and that people are protected against abuse. There is no such monitoring system here. In fact, I'm now informed that JobsPath are subcontracting out some of the work. Subcontracting. The arrival of JobsPath on the Irish labour activation scene has been accompanied by something that's relatively new to the social welfare system, sanctions, an explosion of sanctions from 359 back in 2015 to 11,000, almost 11,200 in 2018. Over 55,000 people have been sanctioned since the arrival of JobsPath. In evidence given to the Social Protection Committee recently, Dr Tom Boland of Waterford Institute of Technology pointed out that those sanctions were there already, but that they have become much more oppressive and much more punitive with the arrival of JobsPath. And we have the totally unacceptable situation that when one of the JobsPath companies recommends somebody for sanction, the department acts as a rubber stamp. They don't investigate the matter at all. So, you know, we have two private companies here now, you know, earning money, getting loads of money from the taxpayer, who effectively have the power to sanction our citizens and deprive them of their social welfare and reduce their social welfare without the slightest intervention by the department. And that's not acceptable. That is simply not acceptable. Now, all this has been done, unfortunately, Minister, at the expense of services that were very properly provided by the state. I noticed that you say in your speech that unemployment was so high back in 2015 that we needed extra resources. Well, you know, the community employment schemes, TOOS, Rural Social Scheme, the LES, they were the resources which the state had. And the obvious answer was to invest properly in those resources. And if you did, Minister, you'd have got a much better result, much cheaper for the taxpayer. Because, you know, I think it's 29% of people who go through the LES system are employed after a 12-month period. In the case of JobsPath, it's what? 9%. 9% get employment that lasts more than a year. With all this money being spent on behalf of the taxpayers, all this taxpayers' money being spent on this system, going into the pockets of private operators. Now, sure, I mean, the uplift in the economy alone would have guaranteed that at least that 9%, if not more, would actually have got jobs anyway. So what function exactly has JobsPath performed over the past 4 or 5 years? It's ironic, Minister, that the Indicon report, which was commissioned by your own department to tell you what to do now that we're in a much better situation in the labour market, recommended 2 things in relation to the LES. They recommended that the LES should now, because of the massive drop in unemployment, that it should concentrate on the long-term unemployed. Well, wasn't that what JobsPath was set up to do? Concentrate on the long-term unemployed. I don't think this country can afford now to have 2 agencies, one public and one private, concentrating on that particular sector of the unemployed. JobsPath can do the job perfectly well. It also, the Indicon report also suggests that, with the drop in unemployment, that the resources being made available by the state to the LES should be reduced. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that, incidentally, because there are many, many people. Unemployment has dropped, yes, but underemployment is still quite considerable in this country. Many people are in precarious, uncertain jobs. Many people are not employed to their full capacity, at their full ability, and many people want to upskill. I mean, upskilling, Minister, should be a fundamental part of labour activation. We have the opposite here. We have downskilling, or de-skilling, if you like, where people are actually trapped in these low-paid, low-skilled jobs and have to go in there on pain of sanction. So, I think we should continue to invest in the LES. I think they still have a considerable job of work to do, particularly for people on the margins. But it would be perverse, Minister, perverse in the extreme, if we were to reduce the resources available to the LES in order to keep these 2 private companies in operation. I find that utterly unacceptable. Now, you will know, Minister, that there was an amendment, or there was a proposal, a similar motion to the one here tonight, put down in the Senate recently, and we sought to amend it. And we sought to amend it by asking the government to do certain things to improve the operation of JobsPath. We did that in an attempt to be reasonable. But apart from one change, namely the right of somebody on JobsPath to apply for a CE scheme, if such was available, nothing else has been done. Nothing else has been done. And meanwhile, the racket continues. So, I think, quite honestly, having thought this through, and I heard the correspondence that Deputy Buckley read out there, I could plaster the room with messages like that from all over the country, which I'm getting on a constant basis, and they can't be all wrong. So I think now it's time to focus on the resources available to the state. Let them concentrate on the long-term unemployed, let them concentrate on getting people out of precarious employment into better type employment, let them concentrate on upskilling. So I think it's time at this particular stage to give this particular scheme a decent burial, so we will be supporting the motion.
I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate, and I'd like to thank Deputy Brady for putting it down as the motion down, and as Deputy O'Dea indicated, Fianna Fáil will be supporting this motion. Minister, this is an issue that you're well aware has been in front of the Committee on Social Protection for quite a while, and this debate is quite timely because you yourself have indicated that community employment is under review with an interdepartmental group. The Indicon report on LES and Jobs Club has been recently published, and JobsPath itself, the natural run, is coming to a conclusion. So from that point of view, the report is timely. In your own particular opening statement, you've attributed a lot of the success in terms of the reduction in unemployment to JobsPath. And I have no doubt that JobsPath had a role to play in it. But the underlying cause was that we had a growing economy. We had entrepreneurs in this country who took advantage of an opportunity, a rising economy, and they created the jobs. JobPath may have had a role, and I don't disagree with that, in facilitating some people getting those jobs, but it was the economic conditions of the country that created those jobs, and I think we need to be clear on it. And you yourself have published loads of figures and so forth, but one of the points that is missing is you've talked about the number of people who have engaged with JobPath, those who are involved for so long. but nowhere have you indicated, which is in the motion that was put down by Deputy Brady, you haven't said how many people have maintained a job for a year or longer. That's not in your counter-motion, and that's quite significant. So we can use the statistics any way we want. And in your own counter-motion, you make reference to the fact the most decisive factor in an individual improving their economic circumstances and lifting them out of poverty is to secure employment. Well, that's not enough, Minister. It's the type of employment. Is the employment of a level sufficient? And JobsPath, the people that we have met, the type of jobs they've got, haven't always, and in many cases, tied in with the level of skills and expertise they have. And there isn't that joined-up thinking. So while JobsPath has seen a significant number of people engage with them, the outcomes, the quality of the outcomes, the numbers you have given in a quantitative way, but the qualitative analysis of the types of jobs they've got hasn't been clear by any means. And there is no question, but while JobsPath was being rolled out, it had a negative impact on other schemes like community employment, LES, all that were deprived of applicants. And I think that's a fair comment to make, and you may or may not agree with it, but all of those schemes found it more and more difficult because applicants were being diverted by and large to JobsPath. So I think that's an important point to make. I was in the remaining moment that I have available to me, I just want to make one final point. In terms of LES, the Indicon report that was published very recently and made a number of recommendations, and I think one of them that should be looked at very, very specifically is where it refers to the long-term unemployed. And I think specifically, Minister, we need to look at areas that have sustained long-term unemployment, geographic areas with intergenerational unemployment. I think there is a huge scope for LES to develop its services there, and I note that the Indicon report talks about those programmes being funded on a multi-annual basis.
Fianna Fáil is supporting this Sinn Féin motion on JobPath, and I would like to thank Deputy Brady for bringing it forward. I believe it is very timely. Our party is, of course, in favour of measures that support people back into employment. However, we recognise and are concerned that JobPath has been the subject of substantial and sustained criticism. Over the last number of years, Fianna Fáil has sought to improve JobPath and highlighted serious misgivings about the scheme. Given the ongoing criticisms that have been levelled at JobPath and the fact that the numbers participating in the labour market have increased substantially, I believe it is now time to wind down the operation of this activation scheme. One of the first issues I dealt with in relation to JobPath was the random selection approach to the person. Unfortunately, not everyone on job seekers allowance, a small amount of people, are in a position to take up full-time employment. There may be a number of factors that prevent people from entering into or staying part of the labour market. Factors may include family breakdown, alcohol or substance misuse, health issues, including mental health and literacy problems. I recently met with a representative of NALA, the National Adult Literacy Agency, and I was astonished to hear that 1 in 6 adults find it hard to read and understand, for example, a bus timetable or medicine instructions. In addition, the high cost of childcare, the lack of adequate public transport and precarious work are also barriers that can prevent people from entering the labour market. Therefore, the one-size-fits-all approach to activation is not suitable to everyone's needs. As a party, we also sought to improve the activation scheme as much as feasibly possible. And, for example, as Deputy O'Dea said, last year we secured a change to the scheme whereby an individual could engage in a CE or a TUS scheme whilst on JobPath. The contribution to local communities of these CE schemes, including working with sports clubs, church groups, Meals on Wheels, the elderly, youth education support schemes, tidy towns, heritage schemes, cannot be underestimated. It is unacceptable, I believe, that any individual should have been placed into a situation that was discussed recently in the committee. I really do believe that the time has come now to wind down the scheme because we have a huge amount of people now in work at Gaurav Mahagut.
Thank you, Corda. Minister, a very significant amount of public money has been spent on JobPath, 150 million we were told, but only 9% of those referred to the scheme have been in employment for 52 weeks. This represents a poor outcome for those who have participated in the scheme and poor value for taxpayers' money. Given the significant demands on public finances, the government should be more diligent in ensuring that private companies contracted to do work on behalf of the state are actually fulfilling their duties. Minister, we've talked about this many times in the Dáil here, and I think there's time for a change. And you did say there's 600 people. The only definite jobs that's here are the 600 people that's employed providing these services. I'm sure they're committed people, professional people, but it's not working, unfortunately. We have people over 55 and into their 60s being put onto these JobPath schemes. Like, these people have no chance in the wide earthly world of getting a job, quite honestly. And it's a form of elder abuse, putting people over 60 years of age into these schemes. Go out and expect them to try and get a job. We all know here that they have no chance of ever getting a job, and it's wrong that it should be happening. It's an awful lot of money, Minister, and I believe when I left school myself, we had 30 of the class that I was in went on to ANCO, FOSS, those type of training schemes, where these people went out, learned the trade, whether it was electrical, block laying, carpentry, plumbing, and those people created jobs for themselves, and not only did they create jobs for themselves, but they created a lot of work for many other people as well. That's where I think the emphasis should be on, because we know that we have a great shortfall in tradespeople, and they're going to be needed because the houses have to be built in this country, and factories have to be built, and there's nobody to do the work. I think that's where the emphasis should be put on. And let these people train these people, younger people that are fit to do this work. I believe that's where the emphasis should be put, and leave the elderly people that are on community employment schemes where they're doing work where they feel valued, and their work is valued in their local communities, and people appreciate the work they do, not forcing them into this false perception that they're going to get jobs. They're not going to get jobs. You know that, and I know that. Thank you, Minister.
Chairman.
Actually presented a particular version of the facts, I would argue. You say 206,000 engaged with JobPath, and of that, 41,000 full-time employment out of that, and 5,000 part-time. Of the 41 full-time employed, only 9% went beyond 12 months. But it also means that 160,000 participants got no employment whatsoever. That's a more significant number. You said that per person it came to €790 per person of taxpayers' money spent per individual. I would actually look at that in a different way. If you take the 46,000 jobs created, and I'm taking your figure on this, that's actually arguable, that actually works out per job in terms of individual back to work, €3,478,000 per individual back to work, and only 9% of those beyond 12 months. So actually, Minister, the facts you've presented yourself, if taken in a different way, can present a very different picture, and I think actually serve to illustrate and demonstrate that JobPath is not working. I think the initial intention of JobPath, yes, was to create a situation to get people back to work, and we of course support job activation measures, and those that can work should work. Nobody is suggesting otherwise. However, part of the focus of JobPath was to also get people off the live register, which suited government, to get those figures down. And I think it's actually deeply concerning, Minister, when you say that 6,000 customers were interviewed to see what their experience of JobPath was like. Citizens engaging with the state to get back to work should never be referred to as customers. They are citizens. And therein lies the inherent problem, in that we have two private companies, CTEC and Thoras Nua, doing the job that the state should be doing. Yes, they're doing a job contracted for by the state, but they are also a private company that are operating to make a profit. And I have no difficulty with companies seeking to make a profit, but I have a serious difficulty with private companies doing the work that the state should be doing. Minister, I'd ask you to reconsider your counter-motion and see that the time has come now to put JobPath behind us.
First of all, I'd like to compliment Sinn Féin on the motion. And I would also like to say that I generally find the staff of the department helpful and courteous and understanding. But there seems to be instructions coming from on high all of the time to take a draconian Victorian view towards people that are unemployed. There seems to be a view out there, Minister, coming from the very top in your department, that there are plenty of able-bodied people who are mentally and physically able to work who are too lazy to work or too lazy to look for a job. I don't believe that. Now, you talk about unemployment figures dropping. If 100,000 jobs are created in the economy, the likelihood is that 100,000 people will take up employment. It's as simple as that. And the figures are going to come down unemployed. And therefore, this idea that you can claim all of the job decrease on your JobPath scheme is absolutely scientifically fallacious. Now, I have to say I am totally in favour of this rote calling people in on the basis of a very, very severe penalty if they don't turn up. And maybe you don't have the same contact as some of us have with the people on the ground week in, week out in the constituency clinics. But for a large number of people in my constituency who are getting called in, JobPath was a kind of purgatory you went through until you were allowed in on the CE and the 2 scheme. And you suffered it. And people who wouldn't need CVs to get jobs because they were likely to get jobs locally and whatever, were spending days working computers while they had no knowledge, no interest and no skills in that direction. Minister, what really scares me here today is that we know that the likelihood is, because I presume we'll get support here from the Independents for Change and for BBP for the Sinn Féin motion, that this motion is going to be passed as put down by Sinn Féin. Now, Minister, you have obviously cleared it up and just said, sorry, that's rubbish, I'm going ahead with this contract again. That is total disrespect for Dail Éireann. Total and utter disrespect for Dail Éireann. And Minister, I hope when this is defeated, your amendment is defeated the next day, that you will have the good grace to say the will of Dail Éireann is I don't renew the contract.
Ryan, please.
The Labour Party will be supporting the Sinn Féin motion tonight. The devastating crash caused by disastrous economic mismanagement saw unemployment peak in late 2011 at 15.9%, with hundreds of thousands losing their jobs, emigrating or being underemployed. The crisis of record high unemployment has largely been addressed, but much work remains to be done to help more people back to work and education. The JobPath approach is no longer needed, in my view. The pressure from the Troika to set up JobPath came in the context of very high unemployment. The greatest concern for policymakers and politicians was the prospect of a generation of workers becoming long-term unemployed and lost to the world of work, as happened in the 1980s. And thankfully that has been avoided. It is our view that public and community services are much better placed now to deliver the tailored supports to workers rather than for-profit entities like CTEC and Tuas. The Department should go back to fully supporting the local employment service and resourcing community employment schemes, along with education and training programmes to help those most distant from the workforce to reskill and equip themselves for work. Labour is justifiably proud that due to the work we started, unemployment has fallen for 25 straight quarters in a row. And that is one of the biggest drops in unemployment ever in the developed world. The crisis of unemployment saw many different approaches applied to get people back to work. Under Pathways to Work and the Action Plan for Jobs, hundreds of measures were taken. Much more needs to be done, but some of those measures can now be retired. The success of schemes like Jobs Plus, community employment, back to education, Momentum and TUS in keeping people's skills relevant and helping them back into work has worked. The business case for JobPath no longer exists. At the peak of the crisis, there were 321,900 people unemployed, a long-term unemployment rate of 9.5%, and thousands of people underemployed and emigrating. JobPath was a creation of the time when unemployment was significantly higher and expected to remain high for some time to come. Frankly, none of the experts in the Troika, the Department or elsewhere expected the jobs-rich recovery we have seen. In fact, for some time, many critics claimed that these weren't real jobs at all and that the jobs figures were false or misleading. At present, based on the latest figures published just today by the CSO, there is a seasonally adjusted unemployment rate of 5.3%. That is still too high, but there is no justification for continuing the commercial contracting of activation services at JobPath. The figures show a total of 127,300 people out of work. Unfortunately, no breakdown on duration is available in that series of figures. But looking at the most recent data available from the more comprehensive labour force survey, there were 50,200 long-term unemployed, but that will have fallen since. There is no justification for a programme of the scale of JobPath any longer to address that. There is more than adequate capacity within Intro, local employment service and activation schemes. Going back to early 2016, there were over 125,000 long-term unemployed, so the numbers have continued to fall and will continue to do so. So any analysis of the facts related to employment and the activation supports provided under the Intro service shows that there is sufficient capacity now to support those who need assistance. It is also disappointing that since the contract for JobPath was awarded in 2015, there has been no comprehensive external evaluation of the service. That is why I want to emphasise the support of the Labour Party for local employment services, particularly their one-on-one approach, the individualised supports they put in place for those seeking employment, especially those who may have disabilities, low educational or training qualifications, or indeed criminal records. The recent Indicon report shows the effectiveness of their on-the-ground approach. Unfortunately, no similar study is available on JobPath. After 3 years, it is bizarre that no independent data is available on the performance of the service. Additionally, Minister, there is a fear out there that I hope you will be able to allay tonight, is that the next series of tenders for local employment services will be a national tender that will exclude local partnerships and, by default, privatise the service to the likes of CTEC. Under the current JobPath contract, the last referrals will be at the end of 2019 with a 2-year workout period of up to 2021. The Minister should now commit in the House that Fine Gael will not extend the period for client referrals by 2 years as provided for in the terms of that contract. I hope the Minister will give that assurance. The one-size-fits-all approach of JobPath is no longer appropriate. It is time to go back to the tailored approach that has a proven track record. Briefly, I want to mention the culture within CTEC. It's been an unacceptable culture. I've received several complaints by constituents, top calibre people that I personally know and whose feedback I trust. And Minister, this is not anecdotal. This is not hearsay. These are people I know and trust. One 60-year-old woman with little formal education and definitely no computer skills being forced to sit in front of a computer to look for work, and being threatened that if she did not turn up on the next occasion to do the same, then her money would be cut. People being told to give up part-time jobs. A man on a short-time week ahead of redundancy after 30 years of service being told to give up the job. There was wholesale bullying of participants. And whether you accept that, Minister, or not, it's a fact. And people here will know that. People were walking out of rooms crying at the bullying approach of some of these people. And it's not acceptable. Minister, it is time to bring it to an end. That type of culture is unacceptable. It was possibly an experiment worth doing at a particular time under particular pressures, but now it's time to abandon it. No more referrals, please. No extensions of contract. Bring it to an end at the earliest opportunity. But I want to express a few words of disappointment. In the last page of your speech, when you say to talk about the future, you say you're looking to the future for activation services. My department is already examining future options for contracted activation provision for 2020 onward. That says to me, at least, that you are planning to continue it, and if that's the case, I'm extremely disappointed. Thank you, Kim Corley.
Ryan. Smith.
I guess on all sorts of schemes like this, there has to be some logic behind it. So I was looking for the logic in JobPath, this comprehensive scheme. And I believe, having looked at it and listened to evidence at the committee and looked at the statistics around it, that the whole project is based on a belief that the problem with unemployment is actually the unemployed themselves. And it's incredible that we would have come through the 2008 recession, the cuts and the austerity in the years which followed it, that anyone would suggest that we had mass unemployment and mass emigration is because of behavioural deficits in individuals who are looking for work. And that is the logic behind the JobPath scheme. If you're unemployed, it's your fault, and we will help you, punish you, force you, cajole you, twist your arm back into employment. And underlying this is an assault on standard employment rights, pension entitlements, security, stable employment, and of course we have a massive growth in low-paying jobs. I think the true attitude of this government, and this isn't a reference to you, Minister, but to the Taoiseach, which was shown very clearly in his class bias during his campaign to become Taoiseach and his comments for his leadership bid, where he talked about welfare cheating us all, and when you pay for nothing and get everything, the jibes that he used, saying that he was the one who represented those who got up early. And to be honest, the Taoiseach didn't conceal his class contempt, unlike this scheme, which pretends that it is there to help the unemployed, but it hides behind a screen that actually is punitive for many people. It is intimidating, it causes mental health problems, and it's very, very scary. In 2011, at the height of the recession, there were 359 welfare sanctions, and in 2017 there were 16,451. They're figures from your office. And that's no accident. It's a direct result of labour activation programmes that come at a time when the numbers actually unemployed has fallen quite dramatically. In answer to a question I asked your department last January, I was told that 6,500 people had been sanctioned directly as a result of the JobPath scheme. In other words, their dole money was stopped or deducted for not cooperating with the service providers. The kind of things that they were sanctioned for, it's not exactly that they were abusive or violent or aggressive or didn't cooperate or couldn't show that they sought some work. But here are the examples, and we've heard loads of them around the chamber, and we'll hear more. For a lot of them, it's a refusal to sign a personal progression plan, and there's no legal obligation on them to do so. For some, it's not showing up for an interview. And in one case that I have brought to your attention, it was because a traveller woman, and she could show this with evidence from the doctors, had to spend the day that she was due for an interview in Crumlin Hospital with her child, and yet she was sanctioned for doing that. A man who gave wrong information on a back-to-work scheme by CTEC, he was given the wrong information on where he should go, and he loses money as a direct result. And when he complained about the personal advisor that was given to him in CTEC, he was threatened that he'd be further sanctioned by CTEC. So last year, the state paid two private companies €84 million to operate the JobPath scheme. CTEC and Turas Nua were both paid, in your words, to provide intensive individual support to the unemployment, and I refer to the examples I've given above. But what's interesting is that Turas Nua, both of these companies have been contracted to deliver a JobPath based on their skills, ability and experience, but since the beginning, both CTEC and Turas Nua have further subcontracted out the JobPath programme to additional companies, CTEC to People First, and Turas Nua, more interestingly, to two companies, Working Links and FRS Recruitment. And FRS and Recruitment and Working Links are actually a joint venture which make up Turas Nua. So you have Turas Nua subcontracting back to themselves. Now, there has to be some kind of an accountancy trick being played there, but this is actually what happened, and under the scheme there is no obligation on them to report to the department that they are contracting out. Like many TDs, I've been contacted by people whose experience is very, very different to the gloss put on this by your department and various ministers. Incidents where people have successfully applied for training courses, are about to go on a CE scheme, and the same day that they're awarded the CE scheme, they're called in by CTEC, who will refuse to release them and insist that they have already started on the JobPath scheme and can't, for example, do useful community work on a CE scheme. It's particularly vindictive when some of these courses involve an educational element and classes to them. It may not be the kind of work that the person wants, but they're willing to be educated and to be reskilled and trained. In contrast, JobPath is more concerned about getting people into whatever low-paid job that they can find them, regardless of their suitability. It is very, very questionable that they find people any real jobs. When questioned by me and the Dáil Minister, you spoke about an independent survey which indicates high levels of satisfaction with the scheme. Well, we're very sceptical about that survey, but a truly independent survey by two academics from WIT showed that the scheme is becoming more alienating and more punitive, and that welfare recipients feel degraded, coerced by the process, and experience anxiety and depression. JobPath does not help people get back to work. When there are jobs available in the economy, unemployment falls, and it is that simple. What JobPath is about is punishing the unemployed and pushing them into the jobs that are low paid, with low hours and poor conditions. More people were put into JobPath at the same time that unemployment figures started to fall. The boom and growth in job figures is based on a boom in the low-paid, low-hour, precarious employment industry, jobs with little security, no pensions, no sick schemes. 150,000 workers are on the minimum wage or lower. Between 20 to 30% of our workforce is classed as low-paid, one of the highest rates of low-paid in Europe, and the highest rate of low-paid for full-time employees at 17%. This is the real rationale behind JobPath, to make jobs palatable to the employer, to make low-pay, low-hours, precarious jobs more appealing than a basic welfare society, to humiliate and bully people into these sectors and into these jobs. It represents the start of the privatisation of social protection, with private companies doing the work that should be done by the public service. In England, these companies have a record of being accused of fraud and bullying in the operation of similar schemes. We need to end the scheme. We support the Sinn Féin motion, and to end the largesse of this state being passed on to CTEC and Turas Nua and other subcontracted companies. If we want to help the unemployed, and I assume we do, then we should divert that wasted resource that swells the account of private companies into education and improving the skills of the unemployed, creating a working environment that respects and pays workers, pays them a living wage and gives them a future that's secure and not dependent on the profit margins of their bosses. Independence for Change and Joan Collins. You have a total of 8 minutes between.
I'm sharing my time with Deputy Pringle and Conley. I'm supporting this motion, and I welcome this debate this evening in relation to JobPath. The fact that the Controller and Auditor General, Seamus McCarthy, told a committee meeting that only 7% were still employment after 12 months on the CTAC and Turas Nua service, I think speaks for itself. It was also reported that 9% of people, 17,100 people, are still in work after 52 weeks, that 14% for 26 weeks, 12% for 39 weeks, and 17% for 13 weeks. That's in the for-profit labour activation scheme. On the other hand, in the local employment services, in the Intercon report, this service successfully achieved full-time employment placements for 30% of those referred to them annually. In addition, whilst working with those with lower qualification levels and most in need of employment supports, the local employment service has progressed the majority of its remaining caseload to part-time jobs and other pathways to work, such as further training and employment schemes. I think we have to ask the question why in 2015 Fine Gael with Labour introduced JobPath as a vehicle to get people into these services and to force them through sanctions, etc., to get into the workplace. And I believe that this was about privatising our services. I believe it was an ideological approach taken to our services, because there was choices. We could have actually put people and resourced the local employment schemes. We could have resourced the adult guidance schemes. We could have resourced the community employment. We could have resourced the rural social schemes, TUS and job clubs. That was the alternative, but there was a choice taken to hand our services, our employment services, to private labour activation schemes. I do believe that this was about that. I do support that ending of the contract of JobPath. Provides as soon as possible without any extensions, and the other points made by Deputy Brady and Sinn Féin's motion, and I'll leave it at that.
I also want to thank Sinn Féin, and particularly Deputy Brady, for bringing this motion, and I have no hesitation in supporting it. Yeah. No voice activation, just job activation. Yeah. It's on again. Yeah, I too want to thank Deputy Brady for bringing this motion, and I have no hesitation in supporting it. And I'm sorry the Minister has left. I know for various reasons ministers have to leave, but it's particularly worrying, and it's already been referred to by the Deputy, the Labour Deputy, in relation to what she said. She's looking to the future for activation services, and my department is already examining future options for contracted activation services. That's particularly worrying, I have to say, in view of the fact that it seems the majority of the Dáil are saying, passing this motion and expressing great concern about the activation programmes on the ground. That's particularly worrying. The second worrying aspect of her speech is the manipulation of figures, and to come in here, whoever wrote the speech, and tell us it works out at $7.90 per individual is totally disingenuous, to put it mildly. And the figures given at the Public Accounts Committee was $3,718 per job created. So when we're going to play with figures like that, really it's difficult to have trust. Why it was brought in the first place, unfortunately, when Labour were in power with Fine Gael, I have no idea. The justification that it was worth the experiment that was said a few minutes ago beggars belief. What should have happened at the time was that the schemes on the ground should have been given proper resources and resourced, and that didn't happen. And of course it was an ideological decision to privatise the service. Now I think at this stage really the government should gracefully just put their hands up and realise this experiment hasn't worked. That's what it has been referred to, an experiment. It's simply, one, hasn't worked. Number two, it's costly. It's expensive and it's not worth it. And number three, it's undermining communities on the ground. And that's besides all the other difficulties, that's one of my big difficulties with it. It particularly undermined the community employment schemes and the other schemes that we've referred to. And these are schemes that are about a lot more than employment. They're actually the Creelor and the Cantor. They're the heart of the communities that function on every level, from providing creche services right up along, and the communities couldn't survive without them. And that also is particularly worrying, that was left out of the Minister's speech. She seems unable to grasp the importance of these organisations on the ground, and I leave it at that. Thank you.
Deputy Thomas Pangel.
Thank you, Last Concorda. Last Concorda, before Christmas last year, I brought this exact same issue up with the Taoiseach during Leaders' Questions. And based on 2015 and 2016 figures, I revealed that JobPath's impact only increased the chances of getting full-time employment by 2% for unemployed people. That's from the Department's own figures. It surely is a great return on the money that's invested in it. And figures for part-time work do improve, but it means that work for these people will often result in seasonal, precarious and low-wage employment. So low are these wages that the state regularly steps in to subsidise their income through the Family Income Supplement, Part-Time Job Seekers Benefit and Job Seekers Allowance. This is very, very common in Donegal. JobPath is a reflection of where Ireland's welfare policy is going. Instead of social welfare being seen of as a right, welfare is now seen of as a transaction, and the entitlement to welfare being replaced by a quasi-contract called the Record of Mutual Commitments. Those who do not engage with the service are sanctioned, and for those under 26, they suffer twice due to cuts made to job seekers for younger people as well. I believe that Fine Gael is actively undermining the current social welfare system in order to justify the outsourcing social services to private companies. The private sector, in turn, further undermines the social welfare system. Social welfare services such as the Local Employment Service, Adult Guidance Services, Community Employment, Rural Social Scheme, TUS and Job Clubs have been in decline since Fine Gael came to power. And despite this, a recently commissioned piece of research by the Department of Social Protection, by yourselves, has revealed that the local employment service schemes, or CE schemes, are successfully achieving full-time employment placement for 28.8% of those referred to them annually. The local employment schemes model is also better value for money, costing €2,544 per full-time employment placement compared to €3,718 per person under JobPath's payment by results model. These figures defy any government justification for the existence of JobPath and prove that adequately resourced employment schemes within community settings work for recipients. I believe JobPath should be shut down and the money reinvested into state services. Ireland must move away from encroaching privatisation of social service provision and re-establish the notion of social welfare as an entitlement and a right and not a transaction. But unfortunately, we need to get rid of this Fine Gael government and their Fianna Fáil supporters for that to happen.
Michael, and Rural Independence, Deputy Michael Collins.
I would like to welcome tonight's motion and commend Sinn Féin for putting it forward, but I have great doubts if anything will be done following the issues that so many TDs have pointed out here tonight. And I'm afraid they will fall on deaf ears. They have before, so hopefully this won't happen tonight. The Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection has hailed JobsPath as the most successful job activation scheme in the history of the state. But in reality, the employment outcomes for JobsPath do not reflect this. As of November 2018, we had 190,000 people referred to JobsPath, and only just 9% of these people were able to secure employment that lasted for at least 1 year. I honestly feel that the government are deceiving the people of Ireland to the true numbers of people that are in gainful employment. When a person goes on a JobsPath scheme, that they are taken off the live register, which reflects the unemployment levels in the country. I think it is only fair that when these people gain proper employment and are no longer getting a payment from the state, that it is then they should be taken off the live register, not before. There is a problem at the moment with people getting referred to JobsPath for a second time. As of January this year, over 21,000 people had been referred to JobsPath for a second time, having previously completed the scheme in full. And it is a fact where an individual is referred to JobsPath for a second time, Tourist Nua and CTEC receive double payments. We need to keep a close eye on this to ensure this is not being abused. I have heard first-hand from some of my own constituents who are frustrated that they have to complete a second JobsPath scheme. These people want to further their education and job skills. They want to get back into the workforce, yet the system is holding them back. Also, we need to look at people who live on islands, and they are expected to travel unrealistic distances to these JobsPath courses. The reality is that if you live on an island, you will have to get the ferry to the mainland, then try and get a bus or a lift to the location of the JobsPath course. That could be miles away. This is completely unrealistic for people who live on an island to think that, one, they will have to be able to travel such a distance every day, and secondly, there is no consideration that no matter how hard they try, they won't be able to make the course at the start time because of ferry times and getting another mode of transport, of course, once they reach the mainland. I have a situation myself in West Cork, as many others have. The ferry doesn't leave the island until maybe 9:30. The man is supposed to be about 30 miles away at his course in around the same time. He gets there maybe around 11 o'clock. Now his unemployment is after being cut to rags. That's absolutely insane. And there's no clear understanding, and it's really it's draconian law here. Also, it is very important to mention here tonight that other job schemes, such as CE schemes and RSS schemes, are suffering as a result of the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection's preference to refer people to JobsPath over the CE and TUS. As a result of this, we are now seeing thousands of vacancies in community employment schemes across Ireland that cannot be filled, and it is important to note that the vital benefits that a CE scheme, the Rural Social Scheme and the TUS scheme provide to local communities. And I'd like to commend each and every one of those workers and the community people on the ground who are giving up their time voluntarily to make sure these schemes run smoothly. In July 2018, I wrote to Minister Doherty outlining the fact that people who are on C schemes and 2 schemes were only getting $22.50 extra a week onto their payments. I asked the Minister to consider raising this amount in the budget at $22.50 extra wasn't sufficient enough to encourage people to take up these schemes. When you take into consideration the extra costs, such as travel costs, etc., that people on these schemes incur, it's not good enough. While I welcome the 5-year increase that is due to come into effect in March, I still think that little bit of an increase on top of their social welfare payment still isn't sufficient when you take into account the costs associated with travelling to these schemes.
Matthew McGrath.
Speaking this motion here tonight, to ask Councillor, I will commend the excellent work of Deputy John Brady, who has doggedly pursued this issue with the Minister for some time now, but she's not listening, neither is she agent. There is no doubt about it. Tourist Nua operates according to a bullying and coercive model. While individual staff may be sympathetic, and I accept that, it is the general view that people are being put under incredible pressure to take up employment in areas that they have no interest in. It is completely demoralising, Minister. You should know that, but Fine Gael wouldn't know about ordinary people. I know political staff members in this House who are being hounded by Tourist Nua and who are effectively being told that despite working 3 days a week here in this institution, they must continue to attend ridiculous sessions where they are questioned if they can use an email or draw up a CV. That's nothing short of intimidation. Minister, you're not looking, you're reading your phone. I'm glad you can read it, but that's typical Fine Gael bullying and intimidation of ordinary citizens. You're who but ye, and what ye can do and what anybody else did. Let them eat cake, the peasants. This is an absurd waste of time and resources. I asked the Minister last year if Turris Niua is a private limited company. The payments made to Turris Niua to operate his contract with her department, the period of time over which these payments have been made. The Minister, in her typical arrogant fashion, replied that Turris Niua is indeed a joint venture between FRS Farm Relief, who we know they put up fences and cows and lambs, sheep and all the rest of it, and do great work, recruitment walking links, but is not intended to publish individual payments to the JobPath companies as there are, and I quote, commercially sensitive, and to do so would place the state at disadvantage, both in terms of contracts now in place and future recruitment that may be procurement that may be undertaken. That is a load of codswallop. That's what it is. Diatribe, Minister. The kind of pathetic lack of transparency is just the reason why I'm fully supporting this motion. That's disgraceful, Minister. It just shows what empathy you have with ordinary people. I again salute the people on CE schemes and indeed on rural social schemes and everything else. But I more importantly support the people, the voluntary bodies that run all these and operate them. Voluntary people, working people, ordinary people, and give their time freely. And here you are, this has been hijacked. You were warned about this in Sosnick, across the border in England. This cabal went on and took over this scheme and destroyed it. You knew well. You weren't confused, you knew what you were walking into, but of course it suited the Fine Gael neoliberal to help the ordinary people. We're the big business. We have the lanes going up the Boreheen with the daffodils and the big trees overcrowding. We're the blue shirts, in other words. Back to where you were before, to help the people. You have ruined people's lives. People have took their own lives. People have been tormented and destroyed and demoralised by the way you're treating them. And it's nothing short of a disgrace that you get away with this. And I'm ashamed that the Minister couldn't stay here. You marched your bandwagon into Tipperary town last Friday. 900 people, actually sorry, 867 people on job seekers were written to. And in that print, they were told if they didn't turn up to this jobs fair stroke PR campaign for election candidate for Fine Gael, their payments might be cut. Such a disgraceful way to intimidate citizens. And in the anniversary of Solihull Beg, where we fought for our semblance of freedom for the British, you imported this cabal in here from England now. You give it to the Farm Relief in Tipperary and other people to do it. It's nothing short of an outrage. An outrage that you're bullying people and intimidating them instead of giving them meaningful jobs. And then to try and use it last week, on the flip side, bring 2 ministers down to you. Taoiseach told me 900 people were invited. Was I not invited? I wouldn't be next 9 or near it. Intimidation, bullying, discrimination, abuse of people who can't get proper work, who can't get jobs, some with medical issues, some with mental issues, mental health issues, everything else. But that's fine for Fine Gael, because you were never handing out of the big people's party. And to head out to Connacht, Cromwell is back in the form of Regina Doherty, and you're not far behind her, Minister, here from Clare as well. You should know better from the rural parts of Clare, Dean and other parts of Clare who are marginalised people. How are they going to travel to these places? It's shameful and disgraceful, and I support this motion. Good.
Deputy Eugene Murphy has been given time by the Democrats.
Minister, the Journal.ie last September reported that 11,000 job seekers were forced to do the exact same programme twice. Reading the Minister's script this evening, that has now risen to 21,000 plus. Now, I can assure you, from speaking to people over a long period of time, since I came into this House in 2016, one of the most hated schemes that was ever introduced by government was JobPath. And I don't have to say to people, well, I'll make representation, because I was genuinely worried about people and their state of mind. People being asked to travel 20, 30 miles out of the way to do something, no transport. We have an issue with having not public transport in many of our regions. These people, some of them couldn't get to work on this JobPath. But when they would come and approach you, they would always say, no, don't make a complaint, because I'm afraid that it might be put down as a mark against me. And I have intolerance for this scheme, utter intolerance. And I fully support Deputy Brady and Sinn Féin in bringing this bill forward. Because many deputies, since this was brought in 2015 by the former Fine Gael Labour government, and I accept it might have been a genuine effort at the time to do something, but many deputies
in this House, and many of those elected in 2016, have on numerous occasions got up here and stated that this was not working. And I know from many of the people that I represent that they just despise this scheme. And the amount of money that 2 private firms are given to carry out this scheme is appalling. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 160 million plus. Now, we had 4 schemes in this country, 2 schemes, CLAR schemes, and they might have their shortcomings, but I would urge the government to scrap this scheme and revisit those community-based schemes. Put the money back into those. Because remember, if you talk about the issue of transport, so if that guy or lassie in the local village under JobPath are being asked to go 20 or 30 miles somewhere where they don't have the transport, but if they could go on a local community FOSS scheme where they're close to their home, wouldn't that make perfect sense? Now, Fianna Fáil have recognised that full employment is an optimum, and sometime during the engagement period with the JobPath service. But the JobPath service is not the way to go. And after 3 years plus, it is time to scrap it. It is time to bin it. And as other deputies have said, it is a time to treat people with respect. And I do agree with other speakers here. This, one-fit-all sort of scenario that this government enters into at times is not the way to treat human beings. And not everybody that comes out of JobPath is a person who doesn't want to work. In many cases, there are reasons, there are genuine reasons. So there is a better way, Minister, and there has to be a better way for our people out there. And my party and I are fully supporting this, and I hope that the government will see sense and withdraw the amendment. Withdraw the amendment that you're proposing to put down here, because you are turning more and more people against you. We have to recognise there are many people out there who just don't fit into certain categories. And in my view, elected representatives and governments elected by the people have to acknowledge that. But in this case, the government are not acknowledging that this particular scheme is a fiasco. It's a disaster. It is unacceptable, and it treats many, many people in society in a very negative and derogatory way. So, Minister Breen, you're a reasonable man. And I know when I deal with the Department of Social Protection, and I was going to say this if Mr Hardy was here when I was speaking to the Minister, they're very genuine people. They're helpful people. I know that from dealing with them every day, and my staff know that. But we must send a clear message to you here that we have to scrap this scheme. It is not workable, it is not acceptable, and I fully commend Deputy Brady, and I'm delighted, absolutely delighted, that myself and my party will support this motion.
Firstly, can I start off by thanking my colleague Deputy John Brady for bringing forward this motion. It's really, really important motion. There's not one of us who has a constituency office doesn't have people coming into him, probably on a weekly basis at least, probably more than that sometimes, in stress, terrified, being brought to JobPath, being forced to go on courses that have no relation to what they want to do with their life, what they hope to achieve with their life. Minister, you live in an adjoining constituency to myself, for which Minister Doherty was here, which she's not. You live in an adjoining constituency to myself. Limerick City has 8 out of 10 unemployment black spots. It's a national disgrace that hasn't been challenged. If I thought for one second that JobPath would have made any impact on that whatsoever, I'd be jumping up and down in this chamber demanding that it be kept. But I'm 100% sure it has absolutely no impact on that whatsoever. It goes after people who had jobs for a number of years, who unfortunately lost their jobs for different reasons. It goes after people who wanted to apply for a CE scheme but weren't allowed to do that. It goes after people who, for various reasons, as we mentioned earlier, have issues around childcare, people in rural areas who don't have access to transport, being brought to meetings that are absolutely pointless, same meetings week in, week out. Being told, I dealt with one person who worked, his actual job was helping people get jobs, typing up CVs and stuff, and he was forced to go and learn how to do a CV. Now, how ridiculous is that? And if he didn't do that, he would have been sanctioned, as you know, Minister. Minister, this is really out of the Margaret Thatcher Tory playbook, and you know it yourself. And Sinn Féin, it's not just ourselves, we're of the firm opinion that JobPath has totally failed. People who lose their jobs and are trying to get back into the workforce need help, support and guidance, but unfortunately most have been left wanting after their engagement with Tuasnua and CTEC. It's not just Sinn Féin who think JobPath has failed. Today in the AV room, and I didn't really have to hear their presentation to realise how bad it was. I deal with these people every single day, or every single week at least anyway. In the AV room we heard from Dr Tom Boland and Dr Ray Griffin from the Waterford Institute of Technology Unemployed Research Collaborative, and they gave a damning account of JobBridge programme. It was described as an expensive construction of a really negative experience. They outlined how the interviews with people who engaged with JobPath detailed situations where people who signed up for jobs totally unskilled to their abilities. The private companies running the programmes didn't take account of family situations, such as those who had to care for relatives, and threats were placed on people's social welfare payments. Minister, I'm out of time now, so in a previous role on the council, I was involved in the Pod Partnership. We ran a really good LES scheme. You could have funded that, but no, because you're taking out the Tory book, you wanted to fund the private company to 150 million plus, which have done a lot for LESs.
Deputy Martin Kenny.
Thank you, Oscar Hirok. JobPath has been an abject failure for the people that have engaged in it across practically everywhere in Ireland, and certainly in my constituency, everyone I talk to that has been engaged in the JobPath process have said so. And I'm not just talking about those who have been in there, Minister, and have found that it didn't work for them from the point of view of finding the kind of job they wanted, but also people who actually found a job and wanted to get the job. They've come out and said, look, I'd have got this job anyway. JobPath had nothing to do with it. And that's the reality, that the figures that are down here of all the people that have been found jobs and the huge success that we have in regard to people finding employment has nothing got to do with JobPath. The vast majority of those people would have found jobs anyway. So what you have done is you have recklessly wasted millions of taxpayers' money on a scheme that is a failure. And that needs to be admitted by government. And I don't care whether you admit it or not. Don't admit it. Stand up here and say it's grand. For the next couple of months, slowly put it away and we'll all forget about it, because that's what needs to happen and needs to happen quickly. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people out there, who may be in a precarious position in life, and find it difficult to get a job, they need support. They don't need pressure. And there's a fine line between the two, as we all know in life, as to how one interprets support and pressure. But everyone that I know in that circumstance that has engaged with JobPath has found it a pressurised situation that has put them in a position where they have been unable to face looking properly for a job and for the job they have wanted, because it has destroyed their confidence, not enhanced it. And I think that's another thing that needs to be acknowledged. And the issue, particularly with people slightly more advanced in life, who find themselves called into these kind of... I have a woman beside me who was called into one of these situations. For 12 years she looked after her elderly parents, and in her early 60s she found herself alone at home, or both of her parents were dead, hadn't worked in any job really for many years, except working in a shop for a little while in her younger days. And the next thing is JobPath were on to her, and the job they wanted to put her into was in a Kentucky Fried Chicken fast food restaurant 14 miles away, and she had no car to get to it. It was totally ridiculous, Minister. And I think all of us have to acknowledge that that's the kind of problem that's out there. It's about 2 years ago I stood up here and I said to the Minister that I had been at the cinema and that I had watched a film called I, Daniel Blake by Ken Loach. And everything that was in that film, and it was based on this type of model that was used in Britain for a long time, that it is a failure. It fails the people it sets out to help. So, Minister, it's time to quietly fold up this tent and take it away, because it doesn't work for anyone. And I think that needs to be acknowledged.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion from my colleague John Brady. Count Corla, JobPath is nothing more than an attempt to privatise and outsource our social welfare system, and it's been a complete disaster. First of all, these companies are only interested in making a profit. They get paid a registration fee for every job seeker on their books. Minister, I spoke to one former employee of these companies, and she told me that the staff were very clearly told to focus on the more highly skilled individuals in the scheme. Now, I asked her why, and the response was, because they'll probably find a job anyway, and if they do, Turas Nua and CTEC can collect their payment for it. Count Corla, I raised this before in this chamber, how teachers who are working part-time and as substitutes and other skilled workers are being forced into jobs that actually don't suit them, simply so these companies can collect their sustainment fee. Instead of a box-ticking exercise and forcing people into any job that doesn't suit them, we should instead have more of a focus on further education, upskilling and genuine supports for our unemployed. This scheme is a complete and utter joke. It has been since day one. Minister, we need to end the privatisation of our social welfare system.
Thanks, Cahirlock. Minister, during the recession, when tens of thousands of people lost their jobs and they found themselves relying on social welfare until they looked for new employment. But now, according to the government, the economy is booming and unemployment is falling, so we need to ask why all of these activation schemes continue to be necessary if there are supposedly jobs for all that need one. Now, Sinn Féin supports all efforts to support people in getting back to work, whether this means retraining, support with job searches or engagement with community employment and other similar schemes. This motion refers specifically to JobPath. This scheme raises serious questions around how we treat people in this state and how we help them get back to work. It also raises serious questions around transparency, value for money and outcome for job seekers. We need more information on who is targeted by this scheme. The majority of those who have had encountered with this scheme have reported harassment, have reported feeling bullied, feel intimidated, not a positive experience by any description. And instead of JobPath, the department would be better off offering encouragement and assistance to the long-term unemployed to access the workplace. They need support to build their skill set and their confidence. The privatisation of work activation scheme is typical of Fine Gael policy, and it does not represent good practice for job seekers, and it certainly does not represent good value in money terms for the state. The big winners here are Turas Nua and CTEC. These companies have received, as many have said, over 150 million between them in taxpayers' money to date, but there is a lack of transparency around much of the reward that they receive for each participant, and only 7% of the people on the scheme have secured employment for at least 1 year. So JobPath demonstrates poor value for money. The Minister for Social Protection has also said that it is the most successful job activation scheme in the history of the state. It just shows how detached she is from the reality, and I disagree with her, and personally I think JobPath is nothing more than a racket. I'd urge all parties to support the motion. We need to end the JobPath and invest in community-based employment activation schemes, CE schemes, job clubs, tourists, adult guidance services and others. These schemes put job seekers first, not private business. So community employment schemes represent a good activation model. CE schemes benefit both the participant and the local community. The government probably isn't interested because there is no money-making opportunity for private companies in these schemes. So we need to ensure that people are supported, that they are engaged with good quality work which is sustainable. JobPath has achieved none of this.
That's 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Count Corla, and I want to thank everybody for their contribution in debate here this evening. Some contributions are very interesting and very helpful, and I think Minister Doherty eloquently set out the facts about the provision of the JobPath service, its performance, the high customer satisfaction and low complaints. The Controller and Auditor General devoted a chapter to it last year and did not identify a requirement to make any recommendations in regard to how the service, the contracts and the payments are operated by Minister Doherty's department. Many observers would view this as a clean bill of health being delivered by the State Solicitor. Despite the facts, which again are performance above expectations, 46,000 people gaining jobs, an innovative payments by results system where the contractors carrying all the upfront costs, high satisfaction and low complaints. Still, last Ceann Comhairle, we heard anecdote and allegation coming without substance being presented as fact by some members. Their arguments are in fact simply that they don't like JobPath. It's not about examining the outcomes for each one of those individuals who got a job, or having a concern that our citizens have an expectation that they will receive assistance when unemployed, and that this assistance will include financial support and support to find another job to re-enter the workforce. Or that the introduction of the JobPath service brought with it increased capacity and activation services across the board, which allowed a significance in the reduction of ratios of almost 2,000 job seekers to every one case officer, to a ratio closer to the international best practice of 120 to 1. Furthermore, the introduction of reduced referrals for the local employment services in 2016 allowed for a more intensive engagement with job seekers, while keeping funding and staffing at previous levels. This was a plus for both staff and job seekers, yet is presented as a diminution of service. Matters raised have included the nature of the payments by results system and the overall costs of the JobPath service. It is important to reiterate that it costs to the date of €160 million for 206,000 participants. This is less than the €790 per individual for at least a 52-week service. This compares favourably with the other activation services, where the cost is closer to €1,000, and uniquely, the JobPath contractors have to bear all the upfront costs, thereby reducing the risk to the state and ensuring that they must deliver results to recoup their costs. Turn to employment support schemes such as the Community Employment and TOOS as a public employment service. The Department's main focus has to be to remain on activation and to progress as many participants as possible from these schemes into full-time sustainable employment. Participation in CE and TOOS is for a fixed-term period, and these placements cannot be considered as full-time sustainable jobs. There are participation limits in place to ensure that as many unemployed people as possible are able to benefit from the schemes. Recently, Minister Doherty announced the establishment of an interdepartmental group to examine the future of community employment social inclusion schemes, with a view to ring-fencing social inclusion places and allow services within the communities to be maintained. Following an early analysis of the Community Employment Programme, a two-strand approach was adopted in 2017, and all community employment placements were categorised into two strands. The social inclusion strand, to acknowledge that not all community employment places were the same, and to provide an opportunity for those who are very distant from the labour market to work and deliver services in their local communities, as some of the speakers have already said. The job activation strand, more directly related to employment opportunities for participants who are long-term unemployed, with a view to providing with more labour market relevant experience. There are currently just over 21,000 participants in the community employment schemes, with 30 to 40% of these placements categorised as social inclusion. However, as the number of community employment places is benchmarked to the number of live register, it is expected the number of places on the scheme will reduce unless the current setup is reviewed. Recognising that as unemployment lowers, there will be less demand for activation schemes. The Minister wishes to make a strong distinction between activation schemes and the social inclusion category. These social inclusion placements require a separate focus to ensure that those who are very distant from the labour market and who are interested in working and delivering services in their local community have an opportunity to do so. The work they provide within their communities is essential, and work participants may include vulnerable adults who need additional supports, including older, unemployed workers, persons with disability, travellers and homeless people. Mr Doherty wishes to ensure that we maintain and support this valuable service. Therefore, this group will explore how we can deliver and maintain these social inclusion services, as well as identifying the correct organisational and governance arrangements for the future. The interdepartmental group will explore the most appropriate organisation arrangements, including which departments should host the community employment social inclusion schemes, including drug rehab and childcare schemes. The Minister expects the work of the group to be completed quickly and intends for a report with recommendation to be presented to Cabinet within the next 3 months. The Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection also supports some 3,250 participants on the Rural Social Scheme and 139 supervisors who are engaged in supporting almost 2,000 community projects. In 2018, Mr Doherty announced an additional 250 places as part of the programme for government commitment to rural Ireland. Overall, there has been an increase of almost over 30% in the places available under the Rural Social Scheme since 2017, from 2,600 to 3,350. TOOS has seen a total of over 53,000 participant places delivered by local development partnership companies since its introduction in 2011. The 12-month duration of the TOOS contract was set to ensure that weaknesses identified in other work programmes resulting from longer duration placements were not replicated. It is considered that the existing 12-month placement period adequate to meet the objectives of the initiative, and after 3 years, a person can become eligible for a further 12 months placement on TOOS. There are no current plans to extend the duration of placement beyond 12 months. In relation to Back to Education allowance, I can confirm that there is no restriction on the number of places available to support job seekers through the BTEA. It is a matter for the individual themselves to pursue Back to Education in consultation with the case officer. As at the end of the year, there was a total of 9,215 participants in the Back to Education allowance scheme. Last Count Corla, before concluding, I want to address some of the remarks regarding the use of sanctions. I wish to be clear again that sanctions are a common tool in use in many countries. A sanction in the form of penalty rate may be applied by a deciding officer of the department if a job seeker fails to engage without good cause with the activation process. Deciding officers carefully consider all the facts and circumstances of each case while considering the application of a penalty rate. This process includes written and verbal warnings and an opportunity for the job seeker to engage with the service prior to the application of a penalty rate. If dissatisfied, a job seeker may appeal any decision to the Independent Social Welfare Appeals Officer. Critically, the normal rate of payment is reinstated as soon as the job seeker complies as requested with activation measures. The number of penalty rates applied to any one time is extremely low. Only 1% of those refer to activation services. The rules regarding sanctions applying to each claim in the same form and manner. The activation service, be it JobPath, Intro, the local employment service, has no bearing on the rules that are applied. And the contracted provider has no role in the application of sanctions. This is solely a matter for the officials in my department. In relation to any specific matters raised this evening which require further examination and investigation, I am sure there will be a follow-up, either by the officials directly or by officials being in touch with the deputies for further information so that matters can be investigated. To this end, I would encourage deputies, where they have an individual circumstances which warrants examination, to supply the necessary detail to the department. Finally, I want to thank again all those who contributed to this to say that the salient points raised will assist the Minister and her officials in the current scoping exercise for activation services in 2020. Thank you.
Sinn Féin, Deputy. John Crow's not there. Deputy Doherty.
While we have sort of null when you be able to launch and run an article behardu dus by Holiaki John Brady agus Denise Special a Chrysler and Kishaw a Harantasi Sadell and Art. Ministers, you've been aware JobPath began in July 2015 and it was heralded at that time by government as the panacea to the problem of unemployment and getting job seekers back to work. Yet, Minister, JobPath has been blighted and marred by controversy since its inception at that time, because rather than providing proper investment in community-based job activation, the scheme instead, what it did was facilitate the transfer of taxpayers' money over to private companies who have been tasked with administrating it, namely Tusnua and CTEC. And these two companies between them have received €149 million of taxpayers' money as of November of last year. In Donegal, my constituents speak to me time and time again of the indignity of that they are made feel simply like another number by JobPath. Some claim that there was little consideration ever given to their needs or to their valuable skills and experience that they can offer and bring to the workplace, and that sums up JobPath in its entirety. Agus ní léon air de hortig JobPath ar na riachtaí na daoine a teag freastal ar athú. Muíon ran fuairt ilig ar scéim neo pársanta as a maithe. The fact that just 9% of those referred to the programme as of November last year secured employment through a minimum of 12 months also speaks volumes. Separately, we know that JobPath's effect on other schemes is also alarming. Community employment schemes, for example, have experienced cut after cut under this government. In my own county of Donegal, between 2012 and 2016, the number of projects supported were reduced by almost 18%, placing Donegal among the top 5 counties for CE schemes cuts, both in terms of number of projects, losses and overall percentage reduction of projects. Minister, when are you just going to accept and admit that JobPath has failed job seekers? And while you say tonight that this will help the Minister in future deliberations, what the Dáil is saying to you tonight, that JobPath must end. Rather than line the pockets of private enterprise, I call on you to support this motion tonight and call for the immediate cessation of any further referrals to the service. The privatisation of job activation was wrong. It was wrong when it was established under Labour Party back in 2015. It is wrong now, and it must be brought to an end. So I call on all deputies to support the motion brought forward by Deputy John Brady tonight, to support this motion, and in doing so we will be sending a very clear signal to job seekers that we as legislators support them and stand by them. And that is the message that the Dáil is sending this government tonight, and you need to listen to the majority of this House if you cherish the issue of democracy.
Thanks, Count Corla. Well, first of all, just in concluding remarks, I want to thank the people who made the effort to come and sit in the public gallery here this evening and listen to a debate. And many of the people in the public gallery have worked extensively on this issue since it was first rolled out in 2015. Many working in the services that actually work. The adult guidance services, the LESs, the length and breadth of the state. And they are the people that I listen to, and the people that walk in and out of my constituency office on a daily basis in relation to JobPath. And sometimes I think Fine Gael live in a parallel universe, and I think that has been hit home and proven correct here tonight. Because when I listen to Minister Doherty, who has cut her losses and run, hopefully she'll do the same now with this JobPath programme. When I listen to Minister Doherty stand here and make some sort of accusation that every single person that spoke in here this evening, bar the two ministers, have given example after example of the catastrophe that is JobPath, in terms of the impact it has had on people, the length and breadth of the state. I don't sit at home and dream up these examples, and I'm sure every other deputy that spoke here this evening is the exact same. These are real-life people that experience negatively at the hands of Torres Nua and CTEC. And to listen to the Minister here, she actually sounded like Comical Alley, trying to defend the indefensible. And I listen to people like those sitting in the public gallery here. I also listen to people who work in the likes of the LES, people that are dealing with the fallout of JobPath. Because after 12 months, the 206,000 people that have been referred over to those, the many people that don't get a job, they end up being referred back over to the LESs. When in the first place, that's where they should have been to start off with. I also listen to the people in the intro offices who are actively speaking out now against this service, saying that it was a massive error. I also listen, quite interestingly, to the Labour Party, who said tonight that this was an experiment that has failed. Now, bearing in mind, it was actually a Labour minister, Joan Burton, who implemented this, was a co-author of this with Fine Gael and presided over it in its early days. And to listen now to the Labour Party saying the experiment has failed. The privatised ideology that this government and their predecessors have presided over has failed. And you need to be big enough to admit that, cut your losses and pull out now at this point. But unfortunately, what we get here this evening is spin and more spin, a continuation of the spin machine that Fine Gael are experts at. When we see figures that they're trying to spin, the €160 million that has been spent on this failed experiment for the 206,000 participants equates to less than €790 per individual. But that is absolute nonsense. I'll put my spin on it, because we know the figures that have been given to the Controller and Auditor General. Of the 206,000 people who have been referred over, only 17,100 have actually been sustained in employment for 52 weeks or more. So I can spin those figures, because that equates to, for every job that has been sustained for 52 weeks or more, that works out at €9,356 for every job that has been sustained for 52 weeks or more. But that's all it is, spin. I deal with facts, I deal with reality. And we know the impact that this has had on the likes of the community employment services. As we stand here this evening, there's over 1,990 vacancies in CE schemes, the length and breadth of the state. And bearing in mind, these are schemes that work, keeping our communities together, ensuring that work that really should be carried out by local authorities is actually being done. Schemes that actually work. 1,990 vacancies in those schemes. And the supervisors of them schemes, they say those vacancies are there as a direct result of JobPath. And they are the people that I listen to. But this government is hell-bent on this notion that work first is the solution, not the individual's needs or indeed their circumstances, and that this fallacy that getting back into work is the solution to everything. And we know that isn't the case, because the type of work that you are presiding over and forcing people into, we see people engaged in low-pay, precarious employment. Over 100,000 people are now working poor. Over 100,000 people. And we know the type of employment that you're forcing people to take is predominantly low-pay, precarious employment. So the reality is, it has failed. It has failed dismally. It's a failed experiment, and you need to cut your losses. As one deputy said, your experiment is dead. You need to take it out and bury it immediately. And I'm going to conclude, because in focusing on the Indicon report that was carried out into the LES, and there's a lot of concern around that Indecon report, and particularly one recommendation, that says at the end of it that there needs to be an open, public, competitive procurement model brought forward. And nobody has any problem with open procurement, but I firmly believe, and the LESs believe, that that is laying the foundations to allow Torres Nua and CTEC come in through the back door. So what we need here is a commitment that when this is done away with, because the House has spoken, the government are going to lose this vote. So you need to withdraw the amendment and you need to support the motion. So when this is gone, we need to look at what's coming next. And what's coming next needs to be shaped by the debate here tonight. And that is doing away with the penalisation of people and the payment by results that has failed. And we need to get back to what works. The CE schemes, the job clubs, the adult guidance services and all the other schemes that actually work and benefit people.
That concludes the debate.
Minister, you are going to lose this vote. You need to cut your losses, you need to bury this scheme, and you need to get back to what actually works for people and their individual needs.
That concludes the debate, so I am obliged to put the question. The question on Amendment 1 in the name of the Minister. The question is that the amendment be made. It should have done a war abis ta. It should have done a gunya abis Neil. Sheila and Golden Cash Richa. Votal. The division is postponed until the weekly division time on Thursday in accordance with Standing Order 72. So, Tandalar Atho Gaji Yahoo Tresha Jai Majinamara.